Hi everybody, welcome to another Leading Ladies podcast, and I'm actually really thrilled to have with you my friend Carmen Powell today, who is a global CEO of the ISC. And so I think before we go any further, it would be great for you to just introduce yourselves, tell us a bit about everybody, about the ISC, and then we're going to get on to a discussion about age and ageism and how we can talk about the workplaces with lots of different generations working together, because I think it's a really important topic for all sorts of social reasons that we seem to be facing today. So that's what we're going to be basing our discussion on. But first of all, Carmen, tell us who you are.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here with my friend Karen. And so my name is Carmen Powell. As you can hear from my accent, I'm originally from Madrid in Spain, but I have lived all my working life between the UK and America. So I have a very interesting and non-linear, if you like, career, because I have worked a lot in IT. So I work for BT, for O2, Cable and Wireless, etc. And then financial services, I work for Hisco's underwriting, and I had a really interesting career path in there. And the World Bank in Washington, D.C. So I moved to Washington when my daughter was 5 months old.
Wow.
And everybody thought that it was brave. I just thought, you have an opportunity, you board the train, and it was a really great decision. And within the financial services, I also worked for a common friend, Sean Fisher, at the Charter Insurance Institute, where I knew about ISC, and I am really delighted to be the CEO of ISC Group.
Because that's quite a recent appointment, isn't it, for you in terms, and I know you've been sort of there for a while now, but in terms of taking that on formally, that's fairly recently, isn't it?
That's right. So I started in March as the managing director on a consultancy basis to identify. I mean, I spoke to the board and also to the chair, was the executive chair at the time, Barbara Schonhofer, that, as you know, is the founder of ISC. And I wanted to understand their objectives, and it was very much about expansion, broadening our services, the membership, and also expanding abroad. I have a lot of experience in terms of international expansion, so it makes sense. And I'm really, really excited about the role, which formally, as a CEO, started in October, so it's not that long ago.
No, it's not. It's exciting, and it's always exciting starting something new, isn't it? And, I know the ISC, and I've taken part in doing some sessions for you at lunchtime with others, and they're always great sessions to give on behalf of the ISC, but also the people that you meet. And it's great that you get, men and women all come to your sessions to hear about what we've got to say, because I think a lot of our experiences are shared by everybody. But it's also great when you have women talking about business issues and other things that they want to discuss and share with people. So I wish you luck.
Thank you.
In your new role. Well, it's not really new, but your new role confirmed, and the expansion for the ISC going forward. And I think at the end of the what we'll do when we issue the podcast is we'll make sure that the contact details for the ISC are available, so everybody can click into that and find out a bit more about you as well. So I'm sure that'll come up as we talk. So I just want to ask you a question. How long were you in Washington for when you moved there with a 5-month-old?
So I worked for the World Bank for about 6 years, but I stayed in Washington for 3, and I worked for the World Bank while I was in London, because there is an office here, although the office in here is very much about relationships with Westminster and the EU rather than the business like I was doing in Washington.
That's really interesting.
So very excited.
Yeah.
It's very exciting because I think that I always wanted to work for organizations that, besides being innovative, they really were purpose-led. So within the World Bank, obviously the mission of reducing poverty in the world, I mean, is one of the main things that you can do. And again, ISC, you asked me about ISC, and as you probably know, it started as a network of women in which they needed a safe space to exchange information, to feel safe, to feel that they could have a dialogue.
Yes, and also, I think it's also I'm a big fan of networking, and I know the last event that I came to with you recently, I met some great people in the room, and it's just fantastic noise and buzz and energy that you get when you're all together talking about business. And for me, especially, I think with you as the global CEO of the ISC, you bring in some experience outside of the insurance industry, and I think that's also great for us, because I'm not entirely sure that's something that we're very good at, is bringing outside talent in. And I think for me, so we wanted to talk about age and things like that.
Yes.
And I'm very interested in a multi-generational workforce. And I think, I look at the press, we've just gone through an interesting budget experience. All of our pensions look a bit different. And so, I'm 60 next year, and believe me, that's taken a long time to say on camera and it be recorded. But I think, owning up to your age has taken me a long time to get there, because I've always felt there have been negative connotations about age. Mm-hmm. And, I've got over that. But I think, I don't want to stop working, not because necessarily to do with money, although that's changing, but we're living much longer. Mm-hmm. We have different things to plan for, but also I think mentally and physically we're very different.
Absolutely.
And we just, that sort of traditional work, sort of school work, retirement, sort of something that people still do. But I think it is very different these days, and I don't necessarily want to follow that path. So, I'm very big on understanding how different ages can work together in a workplace. And I'm not sure that we talk about that enough or think about it from an HR perspective or a strategy perspective when it comes to our people strategies, about how that looks and is going to feel like in the next 5, 10 or 15 years. I'll stop talking in a minute, Carmen, and let you talk.
Please.
But I've double checked what I am. I'm a Gen Xer, so I was born in 65 to 80. Apparently, Gen Xers are typically seen as independent, tech savvy, and balancing work-life balance better than boomers. Okay, so I think that's a great statement. But I would say sometimes, as I'm starting to going to hit 60, people forget that we're a bit tech savvy, that we are a bit, we've seen everything. I started in the industry when we had filing cabinets and punch cards and fax machines that would curl up the paper when it came out. And we had, and so we've lived through that evolution. And I think I worry that people forget those experiences that we've had. We are tech savvy. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot we can do personally to be more tech savvy. But this idea of a multi-generational workplace and talent, do you think when people talk about talent generally in businesses, more generalizations, that they mean young talent?
I think that mostly yes.
Okay.
I think that they think, how can we attract talent? And they take for granted maybe the talent that they have without thinking that many women, as we were talking when we were here, many women feel very undervalued and underrated within organizations, and then they choose to leave. So I do think that when they talk about retention and attraction, is mainly about younger people. But I'm really interested in the multi-generation work, and also how you describe Gen X as technically savvy, because going back to my first job was with Iberia Airlines, and it was pre-email, but we did in the airline industry have email. Because obviously we needed to make sure that when somebody was a vegetarian, they will get a vegetarian meal, that no matter where you were, your luggage was going to be there, and that, everything was going to be running very smoothly. So I was also using email before people were using email, but it was more an inter-company, but very global. You cannot get more global than an airline like Iberia. So basically, I think that there are lots of assumptions that are made. And one of them is that older people are not self-sufficient, and that we will struggle a lot more working remotely, because we also, is fair to say that we have had IT support in our organizations, and therefore people made the assumption that we are not going to be able to cope. So I think that I really like to leave that message that we can cope very well, that obviously everything goes a degree. So my daughter is 18. She's what they call the digital natives. for her, everything comes automatically while we need to think.
They seem born with it, don't they?
Yes.
Digital natives, I like that. They seem born with it, I
Exactly.
think. Yeah.
So I had my BlackBerry, and even as a 3-year-old, she will say, "Oh, you changed your mobile," and I said, "Why do you know?" Because they look exactly to me, those BlackBerries. But she already knew that, because for them it's almost like an extra pair of hands. And just saying, if we compare ourselves with the digital natives, we need to think. They don't, because they know how things are going to work.
Isn't it? Yeah.
But at the same time, I have noted with my own daughter that there is less curiosity of how things work. And if something doesn't go according to plan, they don't know how to sort of have that, no critical thinking, but that sort of ability to stop and say,
problem solving.
if I do this, maybe I have to do that. And I do think that that is again how we can work together, because it's about, we all have different abilities. So as I mentioned in that event that you kindly referred to, I think that this is the first time in history that 4 women, the 4 generations of women, are working in the business world. And I do think that there are a lot of things that unite us more than divide us. Yeah. And I would like to use a sort of analogies where, like making a cake or building something up, in which we all bring our own talents, abilities to the table. And yes, the digital natives will be a lot faster than perhaps we are in sorting out IT problems. We, with Gen Z, they are great at that, and millennials as well, now they are becoming parents, they are that more responsibility. And Generation X and baby boomers that are still around in the workplace, adding a lot of value. It's about that resilience, that emotional resilience, the critical thinking, the know-how, and also another thing that I think that they believe that older women don't have flexibility. And I think that we are a lot more flexible, because we have gone through so much from technology, several crises. We have gone through just so many changes in say generations, the boomers, yes. So the boomers that are still at work, I suppose, are the younger boomers. They are not the 1947, but maybe up to 1965. So they have seen so much and made so many changes. The whole of the landscape of countries and Europe is totally different. Yes. And therefore, I don't think that you achieve that without flexibility. No. So that is another myth I would like to take out, that we are very flexible and technically savvy.
Yeah, no, and I like that. And I think, one of the reasons I really enjoy this topic, talking about age and impact on businesses and multi-generational workplaces, is because it's something that we all face. I love talking about issues that affect both men and women.
Absolutely.
And things that unite us. And age is something that we all experience. We're all getting older. Every day we wake up, we're another day older. Whether you're male or female, it doesn't matter. All right, whoever you are, it doesn't matter. You wake up. It's an experience that we all take part in, and I think, to some extent, there are generalities between us. And I like to talk about issues that can help break that down, because I think if we sometimes think about age in that respect, it does help us. I think it helps all of us to break down some barriers. And back to your point that you just made about flexibility, I would throw out there that sort of, I'm guessing when I sort of hit 50, 55, I found myself in a position where I was suddenly at my most experienced, most available. The responsibilities I had, and particularly more recently around caring for aged parents. My son is now 31. So all of those pressures that you have when you're juggling your career, and this is where it is different between men. I think the juggling that you do as a woman as you progress your career, with coping with the life and the home and your children and school and parents and all that kind of stuff that you tend to pick up, because we just do pick them up. That sort of stops. Mm-hmm. And I found myself in a position where I was like, well, this is great. I've got so much time, but I was beginning to feel like I was And I don't know whether this came from me or whether I was really experiencing. I often sort of mull it over a little bit. I think it's probably a combination of both, really. That I was feeling that my choices were limited because I was getting older. But by being older, I had so much more flexibility, the most experienced I have ever been, and the most available and easy to move and change and do other things than before. And I think it's taken me a long time to work out how to get the most out of that for me as an individual and what I wanted to do. So I think sometimes companies don't look at the availability of somebody or the flexibility of somebody, which I think comes back to your point. We find ourselves, men and women, with all this experience. But because we might not fit a box, that somebody's looking to fill or tick, we perhaps not considered for something that we might be perfect for.
Absolutely. I mean, I was just trying to think in my mind when you were describing, the fact that at a certain age, when you have all the experience, the know-how, you have less barriers, family barriers, because whether we like it or not, in general, women, we tend to look after the household. It's just a thing. I have to say, my husband is look after my baby when I went back to work because we were in America. And so, but in general, I will say that is the case. And I just want to bring a couple of things that I believe women, we need to perhaps reflect how maybe lack of networking, especially in a way, at the moment when we are working in a hybrid or working from home, it looks like if women has taken a lot more responsibility for the household, whether it's for the young or the older, and I've been really surprised how very senior women has said, this working from home is amazing because not only I can be more productive at work, but I can see my children more, I can look after my parents more. And I just asked some questions that I suppose they made an stop, and I said, has your husband taken extra responsibilities? And the answer was no. So I think that we have overburdened ourselves again. And I think that we also need to take responsibility for that. And the other day, for example, I was presenting the importance of networking as an event. And I was saying that, research shows that men see networking and going to events as part of the job. It's just something that they do in the evenings, so they attend events. For women, it's like a trade-off. So why am I in this event that when I could be looking after my children, or I could be with my parents, or even friends? So it seems that the mentality is a trade-off, and it doesn't seem like a part of somebody's role, which men do. And I think that is nothing against or men or against women. It's just a different way of thinking.
It's a way of thinking, isn't it?
Yes, and I think that is detrimental, because one of the things that we do at ISC, as you know, putting programs together, and for example in the UK we have over 50 programs for self-development that you were mentioning, that you kindly attended a few and represented a few roundtables, and when we find is that to encourage also women to come into the city when they've been working from home to do some fun things, and we should do fun things, whether it's making pottery, or I know that you and I are very interested in art, and as a way of building creativity and innovation at the workplace. So I think that that is something that is that we hope are going to be bringing women so that they can still networking even if they haven't been in the office that day, as a way of letting our hair down, have some fun, and be with other women.
I was also sort of sitting here thinking as well, when you mentioned the example earlier, you use your daughter with a phone, and it's very good, but if something doesn't go quite to plan, and one of the things that I worry about from a workplace perspective is, and there are so many benefits of flexible working.
Yes, indeed.
I think there's a whole discussion about what we all mean by flexible working, but we're just going to say I think there are some massive benefits around flexible working. But one of them is that I think you still have to have the time and the space to work together with your colleagues. And I think that's where the younger generation learn from the older generation about problem solving, thinking differently, not being phased if something's not gone quite to plan, where you can go for resources, somebody there to talk it through with that might have seen it before. And I think it's really important that we still have those kind of spaces that younger people can learn from, that it's not, this is, because I think sometimes when you're only working through something, it feels like a huge thing to try and solve. But actually, it's not really. If you've got different colleagues around that've seen stuff before in a project or whatever it is, they're there to talk to you, give you some advice, and so you learn from each other. And I think that's where a bit of reverse mentoring comes in then, from the younger generation to the older generation in the office, around how they're thinking differently, different and faster ways to do stuff. But equally, you get that sort of cross benefit of having experienced things before and being able to share ways out of issues with projects, for example. So I always really think it's important that people are together for some point of the week. I think building a business and strategy, it's great, and I can certainly see, how flexible working is fantastic. But I also think there is that you need to be together at some point.
I totally agree with you. I think that we will be, I know that companies are already finding that there is less innovation around.
Yes.
And also there are a lot of mental health issues regarding stress and anxiety. And I think that before, if we were having a bad day, you will go and say, Karen, can you come down and let's go and have a cup of coffee, or let's walk around the block while we bought a sandwich. But now it's almost like, because you are going through one Teams meeting to another. Sometimes you are just building up that stress, and you don't have a release system, so you carry it with you a lot more. Like, for example, in all the team meetings that we have, we tend to see each other at least once a month to exchange information, to do brainstorming, and also to celebrate. So we do the employee of the month, and we try to highlight things. But I also, because I think that that I am very interested, and I am a well-being coach as well, and a coach, I'm also I also include an element of wellness in our team meetings, in which everybody just walk around, do tai chi, or do some brain yoga or something, because I think that it's really important to give those sort of tools that when we are having a bad day at home, we can just stop and say, okay, I'm going to do this brain yoga for 5 minutes. But it just works. So
yes. No, I think that I love the sound. I love that. But I think back to this. So the insurance industry is an amazingly innovative industry. Whether it's from an IT perspective and a development, or whether it's from products and different thinking. I've always had the view that anything people can make and do, create, the insurance industry is there to provide them with a product and risk management to help them succeed in their dreams. And so I think when you have projects, if you've got people on it that are massively experienced and have seen an underwriting cycle before, understand how the broking side of it works, how to problem solve, and you marry that with some fun, if you're having a project that you may be looking to consider a new product, or you've got a new client you're looking to work out how best to support them, I think if you have a cross section of people on your team, you'll get people thinking differently.
Absolutely.
And then you'll get people with experience saying, well, actually, we used to do that. We did that once, but we stopped doing it now. Everything's sort of AI, IT driven. But couldn't we incorporate that somehow? So I think that cross-fertilization of ideas and innovative thinking is just such a fantastic place to try and get to. But I'm not sure that companies actively think like that when they're hiring, or whether they're letting people go, or whether they... I think there is a gap in the market, between an experience gap where there was a time when the market wasn't hiring people, and there's a sort of a middle gap where I think we potentially need to think about retaining the older talent for longer, because they also want to stay for longer. So, why not try and find a way and a strategy to incorporate people working together better? I really like that.
I think that you are absolutely right. And referring to the beginning of the conversation, when we said that some organizations, they have objectives about attraction and retention, but I haven't seen, and we work across over 100 companies, and we go to about almost 11,000 members now.
That's fantastic.
So globally, what I don't find is how are we going to make this multi-generational work, that is what you are referring to. How can we do the cross-fertilization and maximize that talent and the abilities that they have? It's not just the intellectual level of somebody knowing how to be a good underwriter or me to be a good marketer. We all have innate talents. We all are very different, and that is why, if I may also to say that it's really great that within the ISC we have different generations, because the only way that we can also relate as a business membership organization is that we need to understand what somebody of the baby boomers will really appreciate, what X gen will, and also, although most of my team are millennials, we also have Gen Z. And I think that is very important, because one thing that I said before, that we are more similar than different. But one thing that we can know, I suppose, no look on the face that our generation has been told that we need to work really, really hard to succeed, almost to the exclusion of everything, and feeling guilty about everything, traveling, feeling guilty, not doing this, feeling guilty. So and I think that the good thing about the younger millennials, and I think that the Gen Z, we can say that they are more selfish, but I think that we have to learn as well about having more boundaries. I don't consider them more selfish. I just think that maybe they know what they want, not what my parents will tell me that it was good for me.
Yeah, I understand that.
Exactly. So I always remember my father saying to me, as a woman, you are talented, but you are going to have to work harder than a man. So that is in my psyche. While I haven't brought up my daughter like that, and I think that I try to be a good role model for her, to say you can do anything you want, but I also respected that she was very different to me, and she didn't have to follow my path, that she needed to follow her own path. And I do think that, like I said, the younger millennials and Gen Z, they are a lot more confident at the point of saying, I don't want to do that. This is not me.
And you're right. Actually, that is it's a strength, I think. That may have to balance, but I'm sort of sitting here, as you said that, contemplating probably how much time I've wasted worrying about, feeling guilty about stuff that I should never have felt guilty about, worrying about stuff that people have forgotten in an instant, but I've carried it in my head, for a week, days after something. And actually, it was nothing, but I think it is about that. I would say as well, my parents were I've got a very strong work ethic. And which has meant I've not always done what I've wanted to do, but I've just always worked. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
And I think if younger people are able to follow their dreams a bit more, I admire that very much, and be single-minded enough to make that happen. So I'm not sure it's being selfish. I think it's being focused, isn't it? I think I'm more focused now, where I was a bit airy-fairy in sort of my late 30s and 40s. But that's because there was so much to do. There's so much to do. Juggling everything.
Yeah, but it's also, we've been told, and I certainly been told, when I wanted to do something, like for example, I know that you are very arty and you love painting, that your hobbies and your work were different. Well, I think that Jen said, like my daughter, I think that I mentioned to you, she's a dancer, but she's also is now in university studying psychology, but with dance. So it doesn't mean that she has to give up her dream. Well, before it would be, how are you going to make a living with dance? Exactly. So I do think that the universities are also becoming a little bit more flexible and provide these opportunities for everybody. But what you were saying before, I also think that we can, and you mentioned reverse mentoring, we can do peer mentoring. Sometimes we work very isolated, and again, now that we are working from home and we meet each other less, why not have all these functions to relate to each other. And I met an HR director around summertime, and she was saying to me how shocked she was that she organized like a happy hour downstairs in the building, and she was shocked that most women didn't know each other and they work in the same office, because now, especially when maybe they are not coinciding, because somebody can say I work 2 days a week, but maybe they don't coincide.
2 days from the other people around.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the ways that I think, when you were talking about the interrelationship with generations, you know that a lot of companies have ERGs, employee resource groups, and I think that they tend to have large number of women with made up for many different generations, and that is one of the ways that, for example, ISC, my colleague Genevieve, is working on, has put together a committee in the industry with, again, different skills, different way of innovation, to really try to reach out to these groups and say, what's this that you need? How can we integrate you together and work together, and again maximizing the talents between all of you? And I think, I was just thinking, yes, maybe it hasn't really been a very clear objective for HR, but I think that through these groups we could do something about it.
I think there's some really interesting conversations and strategic ideas to be had from those kind of, employee resource groups, and focusing on that as a, it strikes me that one of the issues that we suffer from these days, because as you said earlier, there's sort of 4 generations in the workplace now, isn't there?
Mm-hmm, that's right.
So man or woman, we've got 4 generations in the workplace. That's a wide spectrum, isn't it, to cover? It is. And I think communication is a big downfall sometimes, because within those 4 generations, we all communicate differently. And I think that's sometimes where misunderstandings, unintended, offences being taken when there was non-meant.
Exactly.
So I think communication is something that we have to work on in our businesses, when we have such a wide spectrum of ages within our colleagues, because it's, I would much rather go and see someone for a cup of coffee, whereas somebody much younger than me would just deal with it on a WhatsApp or something like, and when you write things down, they're often different than when you're saying them to somebody and looking them in the face and talking about something. So I think communication and understanding different ways of communicating, and us all getting better at all of them, is something that's really quite, and, you and I have both worked for international companies as well. And there's those cultural differences.
I was about to say that.
Cultural differences to throw into that, about style and language. And you have to just take a moment and think, it just means that. That's all it means. It's not, sometimes things are more blunt, less chatty than we might be, So I think communication is a really big factor in all of this, about how we talk to each other within our businesses.
Absolutely, and I do think what you just said is right. And before if you have an issue with somebody, or somebody was out of place, or you misunderstood something, it was so easy to say, can we just have a chat and be able to do that? But now it's almost like sometimes we are brewing inside, and that really is, it can be very disruptive.
Exactly. Personally, and for your psyche, but also just
and for the team dynamics and for everything. But when you were positioning the question, I also was thinking about when I was working in America, and it was so different in the approach, because everything was so much more direct, and obviously, again, between the East Coast, it's just very much like the New York Minute, right, or Second, and while in other countries like England, for example, is a lot more, it's a softer way of introducing the conversations. In some places, as you know, in Spain or Italy, whatever, we tend to start in a more social setting before you even talk about business. So it's about, so if we were to translate the knowledge, the know-how for cultural differences
Yeah.
to what we do about so it's not a good or bad way.
No,
It's just
different.
different ways.
It's just
And how
different.
can we maximize that to make our organizations really successful
Yeah.
and thrive?
Yeah.
Because ISC is really about enabling women to thrive.
Yeah, and I think culture and strategy are just so linked, aren't they? So, and I think in terms of building a people strategy and thinking about talent development and how you make the best of all the great people that you currently have around you, there's that cultural element to it that's a really important sort of overlays, isn't it, as a factor about how things might be perceived, how you communicate. I just, it's something that I think culture and strategy to me go just so closely
Absolutely.
intertwined. So, the other thing I wanted to bring up now, and this is where I will sort of, age, as I said before, is something that we're all facing. But I have, and I've shared with you some information before we met today, and remind me to come back to an AI point that you spoke to me about earlier, and I'm going to write that down now so I don't forget.
Yes.
Okay, so but as I've got older, and you're more experienced, your time is different, you start to think about your career now and what you want out of it. I have noticed, working, very lucky I feel to be the chair of GreenKite, and the CEO, Sarah Ager, is one of the most entrepreneurial women I have ever come across, and it's an absolute pleasure to see her operate. And she's found her space, and she's built her space herself that she is most effective in. And I think a lot of women do that these days. I think there is I think the olderpreneur, I'm not sure it's a word I like at all, but I think I think women make choices about what they want to get out of their working life, their career, who they work with, how they work, and create their own spaces. You've been a consultant, but there are some downsides to that, but I think sometimes that can give you some flexibility, maybe, but you can perhaps, be more flexible about who you work with potentially. And I think for me, working at GreenKite, I've seen the most, the change in the business over the last 5 years. It's 5 years old now, so it's not a startup anymore. It's a thriving business. But the change in Sarah as a leader has been fantastic to watch, all driven from an idea. And I think when we get that space, and companies miss out on talent like that if they don't look to cater for it internally. And I think, I've watched that, and it's been a fantastic thing to see how I've seen, somebody look at her space and think, I don't want this, but I want that, and has made it happen. And I'm full of admiration for that. And I think a lot of women find themselves in that position, not necessarily in the insurance industry, but in other industries. I think they look and set their own thing up, whether it's in the media, whether it's in the arts, whether it's in journalism, or whatever it might be. They've looked to go out and set their own thing up. And I've got some figures somewhere that sort of look at the increase in female-led startups over the age of 50. And by the way, Sarah, I can't remember how old you are, but I'm not suggesting that you're over 50 if you're not.
She's just, I think that is early 50s.
Early 50s.
That's it.
Right,
I'm not saying anymore,
so
but
I don't
early
want to disparage
50s.
her in any way, but she's super cool. And so I've just used super cool. Is that a Gen Z or something then? So what's super cool?
It must be, but I like it. I like it.
Anyway, so I think, I think companies need to recognise that there's still that drive in people's heads when they get older to actually achieve something and feel like they're valued within organisations. And when that doesn't happen, we go elsewhere, or we set our own thing up.
Yes. So I have to say I'm full of admiration for GreenKite and Sarah, and that is why when I published an article on women over 50, the entrepreneurship and also the how to thrive, especially even during the lockdown where she was a downturn in all businesses, and she brought this firm, but that is a fantastic firm up. And as you know, we work very closely with Sarah, and obviously Karen is amazing as well. But yes, I think that one thing that women are doing is working on portfolio. So, for example, our account director in the US. She works for the United Nations. She works for another business, and 2 days a week she works for ISC. We are about to a a new account director as well in Canada, and she also it was for an advertising agency, etc. So I think that women are finding that perhaps they want to have time to dedicate to a hobby, but making it thrive as a business, and at the same time to work for one or two companies. So portfolio is definitely growing a lot.
You know, and I think that's a very acute observation. So people know, and you know, I've got a portfolio career as an independent non-exec director. And I have 4 companies in that portfolio, and I would say to you now, I love what I do now. It doesn't mean I haven't loved what I've done in the past, but I've not loved it quite like I love this, if that makes sense to you. And it's all about working with, you get to work with people that you really care about.
Yes.
And you bring some skills, hopefully, to them that they benefit from, and you have that relationship with the business, which is very different from an exec side. And I think you have to sort of get to that point. But I would say, you know, from my perspective, I view it as the next part of my career. This is not just something that I'm doing because it's, you know, I think I work hard at it, and but it's so rewarding, and you get choices, and I see the same potential issues in different spaces within the insurance industry, and it's totally fascinating. But it does give me the time to do the thing that I love, which is paint.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I wanted to be an artist when I was 16 or 17, I was told to go and get a proper job.
Exactly.
Whatever that was. I think at the time it might have been, when we had our careers talks, it might have been things like air traffic controller, which I just been absolutely crap at. But you know what I mean? You had those very generic people come in and say to you, well, you thought about air traffic control. No, not really. So no offence to any air traffic controllers that might be listening to this, you do an amazing job, which I would never have been able to have done. So I think, you know, you come back to things you love eventually. And if you can sometimes start to create that space to go back to the things that you love. And that I feel very lucky about that. A lot of it is luck, I think, but I feel very lucky about that.
Yeah, so I think that there are 2 points that I would like to make regarding this. One, that I think that we have to stop looking at, or to restart looking at, like, non-executive directors, not just something that you do at the end of your career, but that there is a choice.
Yep.
So when you are you can be at the pinnacle of your career, and then you can say, okay, I want to become a consultant, or I want to work from abroad, so I want to now fulfill my hobby, but make a business out of that, build an entrepreneur company like we just mentioned about Sarah. Or we can do what you have said. I just want to be able to give back and make a good living out of it. So it doesn't really have. I think that that one of the main things that this a specific life, professional life is bringing is a lot of choice.
Yes.
And it's not one route like before. I think that we have so many different routes to thrive, and I think that is why, going back into ISC, having many different levels of women, because although our mission is very much about gender parity at senior level, you know, our members are made up of many different seniority levels, and we support all of them. And I think that we need to start thinking that we have a lot more choice than sometimes we think that we have, and to be brave and to go for it.
Yes. Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I think if you have a better understanding of your abilities, I don't just mean in like the practical amount, but in sort of, you know, what you can bring to a business, understand where your skills are, think about that, spend some time thinking about your style and how to get there. It's time well spent, I think, in then sort of being able to move and see what choices are around and being brave. And I also think it's incumbent upon companies to look at talent and think, well, could they do something different? You know, I've seen companies promote people to a position where they know they can do the job. They don't have particularly a technical skill, but they've trained them for the technical skill and built a support network, and somebody's been able to do something different. So I think, which might bring me on to my next point to you, which was when we were walking over here, you mentioned about AI and how maybe not so much in the insurance world, but I'm not sure, so to park that bit, about the influence of AI on selection processes and procedures within sort of an HR environment. And so if you are an older person, but with the skill sets, are tech savvy, sometimes you were sort of saying there is a possibility the AI selects against you for other reasons.
Yes.
So can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I think that in the last, I will say, 5 years, the questions when you are applying for a job are becoming very intrusive.
Okay.
To the point that they ask you whether you are the first person to go to university or your parents went to university, whether you were in food stamps. And you just feel very much when you are completing an application form that is almost like a process of it's not the type of
you've been selected against.
Yes,
because
so
ideally some of those questions will
you are not ticking those boxes. So it's very clear that HR probably will have for the organization a very specific objectives to get certain type of person, and therefore if you are, because of the questions they are asking, that you are not ticking those boxes, that there is no going to be a person looking at that, because
it's
by the time that they get
out
to the person, then your CV will never get there. And I do asking these questions in this event, asking to these HR directors, how do you still ensure that you are getting the most talented people for the job? If 80%, I will say that goes 80%, never get to even being seen by a person. So I think that is one of the challenges for HR to really look at how are they going to continue to attract talent, retrain talent, and also not get AI to make all the decisions for you. Because if that is the only thing that you are interested, or if you are not ticking 5 of the boxes, is that important whether our parents have gone to university? Yes, for social mobility, maybe, but for the job that you are going to be doing, perhaps not so much.
And perhaps they miss out on some great talent. Because it looks different in terms of age as perhaps as a factor. And it's an interesting conundrum, I think, that we should still hopefully end up with the talented people in the roles that best suit them.
Yes.
And how you get that. So I'm not sure how, from an insurance industry perspective, how much AI is used in selection. Maybe the bigger companies, sort of, the Avivas or the, but within the Lloyd's environment, I'm not sure, but I could be wrong. But I think it is interesting to think about, how you might sort of unintentionally get selected against. And that's just quite frustrating, isn't it? So you tend to do, which is back to my point earlier, I think we tend to create our own things.
Absolutely.
And tend to look in different ways, and so of doing stuff or achieving something. So using Sarah as an example, there. So I think it's. I would really like the industry that I love to just take a moment and think about the social issues that we're all facing and marry them with their business challenges from a talent perspective, and try and perhaps be better looking at a multi-generational workforce, because it's got to be the way to go, isn't it?
It will be really amazing, because it will be just by mixing the best of a generation. And I also want to say, because as you know, in ISC we really value our male allies, and there are more and more of them, and that is why I think that the way forward, and you mentioned it a few times in this podcast, is about culture change. And I think that working with the male allies, as you probably know, Nick Dunlop, that is one of our board members, is creating this committee with some city CEOs to really have more of a culture change, starting from the top as well. But I think that we are all responsible for that culture to change and incorporate. Like you were saying with AI, incorporate it in a way that it works for us and not take over us. And I think that we are going to be seeing, as we move forward, that is going to become a bigger challenge when we try to to be very specific about the person that we want, or this thing we were talking is about specifically HR, but it can be in any way. And I think that companies, and as you know, I'm very interested in ethics, companies are going to have to really look very clearly at their responsibilities and their ethical behavior related to everything from customer service to how staff are treated, to how you build products and services, because ultimately a company is responsible for their systems. And it's not going to be, it's not me, it was my database, so it wasn't me, it was my AI, but that you are responsible for functioning, for the functioning of everything that is being delivered within your organization.
Yeah, it's and so I think back to the point I was sort of making earlier, for me, discussions around age and how to get the most out of your talent that you have it's a great leveler. Because, as I say, it's a common thing that we all share, and if we can get an age strategy and an understanding of the impacts on a business, and retaining talent as well as bringing new talent in and getting them to work together, I think is something really interesting for companies to look at. Particularly as people are going to be working for longer.
Yes.
And because we just are. So how do you keep that talent interested and use it differently? Have conversations with people about it. Use it differently. I think that's another thing, the fear factor of talking about these things.
Yes, and that is where the flexibility may come. We live in a very unknown world, and we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or next year. And I think that being open-minded and understanding that we need to incorporate change rather than resist it, but how is that change going to be working for us as individuals, as companies, and as a society is going to be a very big challenge, and we need to race to it.
No, I think actually, unbelievably, we've been here nearly an hour.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I know. So, but I'm just, because it's been so fantastic talking to you. And I think what you just said there is a really great note to end on. I would also like to say that at some point, you and I are going to do a podcast about art and art therapy.
Yes.
That's another part of the many strings to your bows that you have. Is so we're talking about art, and I think there's some really interesting parallels between business and art and the benefits.
Absolutely.
Between the two, which is another podcast for another time. But I would love to do that with you and talk about that, because I think that's a really interesting.
Thank you.
There's some interesting parallels and discussion points to follow down there. Is there anything you would just like to finish off and say before we close this? But I've loved talking to you today. I know much more about you now, which I love.
Thank you. I mean, I am really happy to have contributed to the podcast, and in such an issue that it really touches all of us.
It does, yeah.
Because it's about, again, all of us working together, regardless of the sex, regardless of the race, regardless of the age. And I think that if we see that it's an intersectionality into most things, and we just need to incorporate that rather than resist it. But for me, it's very much about IFC is obviously very committed into helping women thrive. We are, I will say, one of the few organizations that are focusing on women only.
Yes.
And I think that there is a space, there is a need for that still.
Yeah, I think there is. Unfortunately, in nearly 2025, I'd like to be saying, no need for that.
27% pay gap, and the pay gap means the seniority gap, and it's very much like that. And also a global international network where women can feel very safe about if they want to raise their profile or do like public speaking. Nobody's going to laugh, and it's just about all helping each other.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
I just want to say that I find that being the CEO of ISC Global, I feel very privileged, and I mean it when I say that it's a very special role.
No, it is, and I'm very happy to support you wherever I can. I know the GreenKite is as well, and it's been great talking to you today.
Thank you.
I hope some of this has made sense to everybody. As I said, we'll make sure that the ISC's contact details and the link are on the website information when we on the podcast information when we send it out, and we'll do one on art at some point.
Yes.
Because that's very cool, and I just think the beauty of working with people of different generations is absolutely fantastic. And if we get the communication right, it could be a really powerful thing. And I would just like to finish on a note that's saying I'm 60 on the 26th of June next year. So any bottles of champagne will be gratefully received. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Carmen. And
Thank you.
And thank you for everybody for listening.
Same here. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.